What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review of Control Ultimate Edition after 100%. So, just a couple things real quick. I'm going to go over the story part of the game first. That way I can put a timestamp down in the description below so that people who don't want spoilers can go ahead and skip past that and hear about the rest of the game. And so I can just go ahead and get it out of the way. Now, the short version, for those people, real quick, is simply that you are Jesse Faden. You arrive at a building belonging to a federal agency that you have been looking for some time because you believe that your brother is here somehow in some capacity after a seemingly paranormal event that happened in your past. That is the short synopsis and spoiler-free version. Jumping ahead for the more long-form version, one more caveat here. The plot of this game is twisting and confusing, and quite frankly, difficult to describe. So, while I understand what happens in the game, I have a hard time explaining it through videos here, as this is honestly, at this point, the third or fourth time I've attempted to do so. If I explain the story in a not great fashion, sorry about that. It's difficult for me to describe it well. So, in order to do so, I'm going to, again, spoilery part of the story here, tell you a bunch of things, not in the order that the game explains them, because it's a very twisting path, and the game does very well. I can't fault the story. It's a very well-told story. But, again, I have trouble hitting all those plot points talking about it. So because of that, I'm going to have to basically tell you a bunch of things about it and kind of where it ends up, but there's so much nuance to it, it's hard for me to get it all out. With that in mind, here's my best shot. For the story of this game, you play Jesse Faden. You come to the Federal Bureau of Control looking for your brother Dylan, who was abducted by the Bureau when you were young children, 10 or 11. I think you might have been maybe 12. It's somewhere around that age. When you were kids, you guys found a slide projector that opened doors to other dimensions. Inside one of them, Jesse and Dylan ran into a paranormal being that they began to call Polaris, that is later known as Hedron inside the Federal Bureau of Control. This entire event from your childhood is what the Federal Bureau of Control calls an AWE, an altered world event. Something paranormal or strange happens in the real world and either creates or exposes an object of power. This kind of thing alerts the Federal Bureau of Control. They came to where it happened, which was a town called Ordinary, and while you, Jesse, managed to escape them, the Federal Bureau of Control did manage to get your brother Dylan and take him wherever. So now that you have grown up, you've managed to find the Federal Bureau of Control with the entity that is now living in your head that you and your brother found, that you call Polaris. It helped you find this building in New York called the Oldest House. Now Jessie arrives here hoping to find her brother Dylan. However, when she arrives in the building, it's empty. There's nobody around. She eventually finds the body of the previous director of the Bureau, who seems to have killed himself. Upon picking up his weapon that is nearby that looks very strange, it turns out that the weapon itself is an object of power. That is, an object that can grant someone who is known as a para-utilitarian, which is basically someone that can use paranormal powers, a power of some sort. So the service weapon actually is the power itself. Upon grabbing the service weapon, you are transported to the astral plane where these objects are connected to. And then you meet another paranormal entity known as the Board, which seems to be the actual head of the Bureau. And they explain that basically they're going to put you through a trial where if you fail, you die, but if you succeed, you become the next director and get to use the service weapon. So, obviously you succeed, and you become the next director of the Federal Bureau of Control. Now from here, you can rescue some agents who can tell you that the rest of the agents in the building, and the reason it's empty, have been found and corrupted by the hiss, they call it. By donning these special harnesses called a Hedron Resonance Amplifier, you can be resistant to the hiss's effects, but without it, you will go insane and be corrupted by the hiss almost immediately. You help these agents lift the lockdown in the building before they finally tell you about your brother that you actually want to know about. They explain that your brother was actually also being groomed to become the next director, because as para-utilitarians, they're uniquely able to be those. It turns out that your brother Dylan, after being trained for a while for this role, became unstable and killed a few of the agents. Now they'll finally tell you where he's being held in the Oldest House, the building you're in, and you can go to look for him. Well, when you get there, you find out he's escaped, and almost immediately the agents from earlier will call you and tell you that he actually turned himself into them and they need you to come back to the main area, the main little hub area. Now, when you get there, you can find your brother, who's being locked up, seemingly of his own volition, and you can have a conversation with him where he explains that he willingly became corrupted by the Hiss in order to escape the Bureau's control because they've essentially been holding him prisoner up to this point. He also explains that the slide projector from your guys' youth is actually here in the Bureau as well, and that you should go find it. So in your search to find this slide projector, you learn a ton of stuff, and that is that the Federal Bureau of Control was using the projector to explore the slides that they had found, or at least the one that Jessie didn't destroy before she ran away. And inside this slide, the Bureau actually also found what they refer to as Hedron, but what your character knows as Polaris. Now, Polaris has been actually guiding you through the game up to this point. Jessie talks to it regularly. However, this is where we find out that the Bureau's Hedron resonance amplifiers are made from the resonance that comes from Hedron, or Polaris as it's known to you. This is also where we find out that the previous director, Trench, was actually corrupted by the Hiss while exploring this slide, because the Hiss, for whatever reason, want Polaris dead. So Trench becomes corrupted by the Hiss, is, through this corruption, forced to let the Hiss into the oldest house, which is what caused the current predicament. Now, as you're looking for the slide projector, you actually find where the Bureau had brought Hedron into our world and was keeping it captive. And this is how they made the Hedron resonance amplifiers that we talked about. Polaris called Jessie to the oldest house in an attempt to protect itself from the Hiss who was actively trying to attack it. You find Hedron, it's being attacked, you try to defend it, but it dies. This is where Jessie actually gets taken over by the Hiss, but because Polaris has been living in her head for so long, a piece of it is still there. So it would appear that Polaris in some form is still alive through Jessie and that connection that they have. And through that connection, Jessie is able to overpower the Hiss and not become corrupted by it. From here, she snaps back to reality, has to go to the part of the house where the projector actually is this time, and using it, she travels to the astral plane to confront Dylan, who had already escaped. She manages to cleanse Dylan of his Hiss corruption, but he's now in a coma while you properly take over the Federal Bureau of Control as its director. Now again, that's not everything, but it's a very convoluted story, and that was like the most compact way I could put it. Alright, so from here there are 2 DLCs and some couple free updates that they put out. The 2 DLCs kind of set up potential for sequels or perhaps other games in the same world, because if you are unaware, the developers of Control, Remedy Entertainment, have actually made other games in this universe already. The most notable being Alan Wake and Quantum Break, I think is the name of the other one, that also happened in this world, and the DLCs definitely kind of set up some teasers and stuff for stuff that could happen later. And I do honestly expect that at some point Remedy will want to continue this game, or at least this world or franchise, whatever you want to call it. Now, probably the best thing about Control is simply the world building. The story itself is pretty solid. Like, actually playing through the game, it's interesting, it'll keep you engaged. There's only one difficulty setting, so you can get into that. There is, with one of the updates, they added some options for different difficulty modifiers, but ultimately there's just the one difficulty. And because of that, you're essentially going to explore this house, right? So the oldest house is actually just a giant skyscraper that is in New York. And as mentioned, and unless you skipped, of course, the Federal Bureau of Control investigates altered world events from here. Altered world events are, of course, the events that can produce or expose objects of power. And these events range from all sorts of stuff. The entire plot of Alan Wake is essentially an altered world event. Throughout Control, you can also investigate and find out others from all of the collectibles that you can find throughout the game. And there are tons of these collectibles, and they do a lot of the heavy lifting for filling out the world building that I was mentioning earlier. You can find everything from like little audio logs to like actual video logs to just research and papers that the Bureau has compiled, and you can play this stuff back anytime you want. People's personal favorites seem to be the collection of video logs from the head researcher of the area, Casper Darling, the guy who actually made the Hedron resonance amplifiers, where he explains all sorts of things about the paranormal world that you find yourself in. And while you explore the oldest house in what I will describe mostly as a Metroidvania-style action-adventure, where you unlock abilities and powers that allow you to traverse new terrain, and then you can go back to places you have already tread to find and explore new things. So that gameplay really helps Control out, especially with the 1 difficulty setting. It's kind of an easy to learn, hard to master situation, where the hiss will come in varieties of enemy types and you kind of have to figure out which power is best against them at which time. But the controls themselves aren't difficult. There's like 5 or 6 different total paranormal powers to use, and there are upgrade trees for some of them that kind of let you use them in different ways, so that's interesting. It's a good, solid gameplay style. And the combat, of course, as you've probably already seen and I've mentioned, is a third-person action-adventure style. Ultimately, while it's fun at first, I do find that the combat tends to get kind of boring, especially around that 20-30 hour mark. So, the game kind of sets you up to believe that you're going to be able to pick a build, because the service weapon can be modded into several different types. There's Shatter, which is kind of more like a shotgun. There is things like Pierce, which is more like a sniper version. There is Grip, which is kind of like your standard pistol. There's a charged shot. Some of the DLCs add fun stuff like a grenade launcher style. So there's all that, which you can then use mods to modify and change exactly how it plays out. In addition to your character's personal mods, which let you modify things like your paranormal energy, which lets you use your paranormal powers, your health, and just all sorts of little stuff like that for the personal mods. And then there is a skill tree for all of the paranormal powers you get, which will do everything from just straight up giving you more health, giving you more energy, adding flat damage to your paranormal powers that do damage, adjusting what those powers will actually do. For instance, shield. Well, there is an ability where when you drop your shield or it gets tossed out, that it will actually explode and deal damage to enemies nearby in addition to just falling off. You can also pick up an ability specifically for shield that will let you use dodge while you're using shield to damage enemies, called Shield Rush, stuff like that. Now, my problem with these is simply that it implies the existence of builds, because you start the game, you're like, oh, I can spec into one of these, but you'd actually be wrong to think that, which was a little disappointing for me personally, because they added all these RPG elements, and then they just kind of fail to follow up on them, in my opinion. First of all, there are no skills or modifiers for the service weapon as far as the little skill trees go. Nothing in there will actually add to that. The entirety of the service weapon system is basically the mods and the different types of weapons you can unlock. And then the skill trees are almost always relegated specifically to your paranormal powers and your health. And while at the beginning of the game, that will cause you to favor one style of combat, for instance, you get the launch ability, and then if you pour all your points into launch, it'll do a ton of damage, so you'll want to favor that. However, what you'll realize once you get later into the game is that you actually get enough skill points eventually to literally fill out the entire skill tree. So while there's a little bit of variance at the beginning of the game, ultimately, everyone's going to wind up with the same build at the end, because what combat boils down to is what do you use against each enemy type later on in the game. And that gets old real quick, at least for me personally. And I think that is pretty much going to wrap up what I have to say about Control Ultimate Edition. It's a very unique game. I actually really enjoyed the story quite a bit. It was very interesting. The world they've built out and how they've built it out through the Federal Bureau of Control is just genuinely really impressive. And that's probably the best thing about this game. It's very pretty. The graphics are very solid. I'll never argue with anybody on that. It's a very good-looking game. But probably the single best thing about this game is its willingness to explore this paranormal stuff while simultaneously being upfront about it, but obscuring some things. And they never outright tell you the answers to a lot of things. You have to piece this stuff together. Combine that with 2 very well done DLCs that add to the game, add to the world, set up future plots for possible future games. And it's a solid game, no problem at all. You can pick it up on Steam for, I believe, $39.99 right now. I actually got it on sale for like $25, I think. So across the board, pretty good game. For $40, you could do worse. So that said, if you see it on sale, you should definitely grab it. It's pretty good. I enjoyed my time with it, especially given that I 100%ed it. So there you go, guys. Let me know what you thought about the game, or if you'd like to try it, anything like that, down in the comment section below. Please like, comment, subscribe. All those things really help out the channel. We're growing quite a bit here recently, and I hope you guys stick around, especially if you made it this far into the video. Thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.